Welcome to the EdVenture Brief, a podcast designed to give you insight into the startup ecosystem. It is brought to you by EdVenture, the UK's first student-led venture builder and accelerator, bringing universities' most talented people and ideas together. On this podcast, we speak with established founders, VCs, and EdVenture's most successful participants to hear about their journeys and experiences. To find out more about EdVenture, visit our website at edventure.vc.
Today we're with Zaliia Gindullina, I hope I pronounced it correctly, from Kidbrooke AB, which provides financial analytics B2B. So maybe first you could introduce yourself quickly and just give a brief overview of what Kidbrooke does, and then we'll maybe go over the questions.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. I'm Zaliia and I'm the head of business development at Kidbrooke. We are a Swedish scale-up that helps banks, insurers, and other fintechs to build next-generation digital wealth and credit experiences. We do that by supplying our back-end technology through flexible APIs.
Maybe just as a side information, Zaliia has been on our guest talk already, so there'll be some questions that remain from the guest talk. So maybe Shannon, if you can just give a brief background when you introduce the questions, then that'd be amazing.
Sure. So Zaliia came to our EdVenture program guest speaker lectures. She gave an amazing guest talk to us about Kidbrooke and especially fintech, the fintech industry within Sweden and the wider context as well. She also talked to us all about business development, all about how to relate to your customers and how to, most importantly, structure your business. So business strategy was very much discussed in our guest talk. Now, we had amazing questions from our participants from the guest talk, and we have some remaining questions that our participants have asked, but has yet to be answered. So the first question would be, do you foresee challenges in navigating regulations as you expand to more countries?
Well, we made sure to limit the areas of regulatory exposure from our side to a minimum, as I mentioned before. For instance, that would be the onboarding and execution parts of these customer journeys that are usually done on the customer side from the regulatory standpoint. However, while expanding to various domiciles, we still foresee that we will have to ensure some local details of the regulatory environment to be properly taken care of. That would be the tax regimes, for example. Additionally, I think it's important to mention that we structured our software in a way that any decision made on the behalf of our customers using our APIs would be explainable, which would make it easy for the authorities or for the internal teams to examine it and audit.
You mentioned tax regimes. So what would you say would be the most challenging regulation that you would try to navigate around?
Well, I think that the tax regimes are essential to provide financial advice within this domicile. So this is just basically something we have to do. And of course, the tax regimes may be complex depending on which country we're expanding to. But yeah, I don't think that these things pose an existential difficulty to us in terms of modeling.
It's very interesting how, the legal aspect has a great play in especially fintech and fintech industry that is cross borders and cross national. And it's amazing to see how the fintech firm that you're working in, Kidbrooke, is trying to navigate these regulations as effectively as possible. So in a historical, retrospective perspective, is there something that you and your team would have done differently in terms of Kidbrooke's development? If you could hop on a time machine and essentially go back to the beginning of the firm, what would you have done differently?
Well, it is a little bit of hard to think in terms of what ifs in such a fast-moving area such as fintech, to be honest. So we actually tend not to. The experience that we gained being a consulting firm, for instance, was really necessary for us in terms of identifying what sort of software we would like to produce. And I don't think that we would actually do anything differently from that perspective.
I asked this question in guest talk already, but maybe just for background, what was the incentive for the transformation from a consulting to a B2B API providing company?
Essentially, it was mostly the customer demand because we found ourselves building similar software solutions for our customers. And in some cases, it was quite hard for them to update and maintain on their own. So they came back to us in a couple of instances and asked, why don't you produce software and manage it yourself? So it was really driven by the customer feedback in the end.
Was it like continuous, the decision for the strategic transformation? Or was there a moment where you said, okay, now we have to change?
I think it came sort of bit by bit, but there was, of course, one point where we decided to go full into the new strategy and embrace the software model completely, both in terms of our marketing and our sales approach.
Would you care to explain a bit more about how that transition went like, and what are some challenges that you faced during the transition?
There were a number of challenges, of course, that we faced during the transition. It was basically, as I mentioned, rewiring our entire marketing strategy. It was repackaging our solutions. Some methodologies and the logic of the software has already been developed by the time, but we spent quite a considerable amount of time trying to map the new markets that we would be addressing in terms of, like which categories of customers would be interested in it. And we spent quite a lot of time trying to map the marketing message correctly. And also we spent considerable time addressing what would be the niche that we would be coming into, because some of the solutions already exist in this market. And it is very important for a company to find yourself in the sea of the solutions that already are present.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you said really brought me back to the discussion and the guest speaker talk before when you came on, was you talking about The Levers of Control, which is the book by Robert Simons. And you talked about how it's very important to set up the boundary systems within a certain business that would entail setting up the core values, the strategic uncertainties, and like the risk to be avoided, and also critical performance variables were also talked about. And I think I learned quite a lot from that. So if anyone is interested in learning more, they could definitely check out the guest speaker talk that we will also be uploading soon on all of our platforms. So please stay tuned. Anyways, would you have anything more to add to this point before we move on to next question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that that book was really helpful, and for sure have a read. It actually contained some information on how to handle business transformations. And that was the real instance when the university book created a real value upfront in a real life situation at work. So I really do recommend.
Yeah, I'd say everyone who's interested in business strategy, do take a look. Now, the next question would be more so asking about the sustainability of the firm. So how are you ensuring the sustainability of the firm in terms of business strategy and also in terms of how well it's persisting through especially the pandemic right now?
If we look internally, there are a number of things we do. For instance, we have things such as diversity and inclusion policy in place, and we also make sure to recycle our waste properly and minimize the use of paper and things like that, which are small things you would imagine, but are quite essential in the end. And if we broaden our view to our customers, there are two main areas we try to work on quite extensively. One area is that we are trying to make sure that our software is efficiently implemented, so it doesn't consume unnecessary amounts of energy when it performs calculations in the cloud. And another thing is that we continuously ensure that the logic of our software complies with the regulations active in the domiciles that we're working. A good example would be actually that the MiFID II and IDD transparency regulations were an inspiration for creating Outrank in the first place.
Right. Would you care to explain more about the IDD regulations and what that entails?
MiFID II and IDD are the transparency regulations that are in the area of the financial advice. IDD is more in the area of insurance, and MiFID II is more in the area of classical wealth management. So what they do is that they regulate how and in which circumstances the firms active in the space can take kickbacks, for instance, from the funds that they are recommending to a customer, and they try to make sure that the customers receive well-grounded financial advice that wouldn't be swayed anywhere by potential kickbacks that the advisor would receive from the industry.
Interesting. Now, I just did a little quick Google search of IDD, which stands for Insurance Distribution Directive, and it is a EU legislation which sets essentially, like as you said, regulatory requirements for firms designing and selling insurance products. Now, It is a EU legislation, which means that after Brexit and after like the twilight period of Brexit, would you say that there are a lot of contention in terms of how, if fintech firms were to operate in the UK, how would the IDD be implemented? I'm just kind of curious about how that would work out.
Well, we don't know how it would work out, of course, because who knows? Like, where does UK go after it left the European Union is a good question for all of us, especially. But I think that since it's a transparency regulation and since it has already been implemented, and usually the implementation of regulations like this one take a lot of time, they take a lot of effort on the industry side, especially because you need to update your infrastructure properly and you need to make sure that the systems that are in place are adhering to such regulation. I think that deregulating it would be an additional challenge to do, even though like it could be of interest for these firms. But I don't envision them performing any steps back on it anytime soon. But maybe I'm wrong. It's such an area that you just don't know what is going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, obviously, it's such a contentious question. You know, every stakeholder in the world arena are struggling and are trying to open this can of worms. But I guess, honestly, with what is happening in the world right now, we'll just have to see in the near future, hopefully within the next month or the next 2 months. We really don't know. Anyways, additional questions we have for Kidbrooke. So where does most of your capital input go in terms of buying or improving AI services or investing in employees? This is actually a question submitted by me. So,
since most of our software is developed, improved, and supported in-house, it would be developing the APIs and therefore investing in employees, because it's the employees who do the development work.
I had just a quick additional question. How would you describe the competition that Kidbrooke is experiencing, and how do you deal with it? It's a question that we often ask founders, how they dealt with competition, as like most startup founders will face competition at some point. So was the competition challenging for Kidbrooke, and how does Kidbrooke handle competition?
I think that it is very much of a question of focus. Of course, we have competition, and this is a huge market that I think will only grow going forward because more and more financial institutions are deciding to digitalize their offering. But in our experience, we have some competitors which tend to focus on different areas of the offering. For instance, some of them focus more on front end, so they have these amazing UIs. And we tend to not take them really as competitors. We tend to partner with them instead, because then we can help them or strengthen their offering with our analytics. In terms of those who provide analytics, the head-on competitors, then I think that there is more competition from more established firms. And then we try to compete on tech and the actual offering we provide. For instance, we had a competitor that we managed to outcompete just about half a year ago. Oh my God, the time flies. And the reason why we outcompeted them was because our solution was cloud native and it was much faster than what the competitor could offer. And since they were an established older firm, it was a bit harder for them to be flexible and update their software and their offering as quickly as we can do. So it's either tech or it's really, really focusing on finding your place in the industry and see where exactly you can help your customers the most.
Okay, thanks so much. It's a great answer.
I also want to kind of touch on about how you mentioned that, sometimes small fintech firms, they have a comparative advantage in the sense that they are more agile and they are more flexible and malleable to change. And that's why probably the reason why Kidbrooke got the offer or got the deal over the other firm was because it's a lot more agile, it's adaptable to change. Now, in this case, I think it's very much intertwined in how the fintech industry actually progresses and develops as an industry. Do you think big fintech firms, would have a comparative disadvantage in only that sense where it's less flexible? How about the other factors that we're trying to factor in when we're comparing like small fintech firms and big fintech firms?
Well, the bigger the organization gets, the more challenges it faces in terms of the organizational structure, right? But I think that the larger fintechs are still quite well equipped to be agile and to address the changes, mostly from the technical point of view. Because one of the largest challenges that the incumbents face, like these banks and insurers that have been with us for many decades, is that their internal IT infrastructure is very old and very hard to update. And therefore, if you are a big fintech that just appeared, you are very likely to have a very new and very agile IT infrastructure that can integrate with APIs, that is ready to do so, and that is more ready for partnerships and more ready for building out their solutions. But in terms of organizational structure and business strategy, it would still be quite a challenge to realign the people in a certain direction, especially if it is a large change.
Right, I see. That really outlines, the comparative disadvantages and advantages between the scales of fintech firms. Now, my next question goes to your team specifically. So the employees of Kidbrooke, what is the background of your team? Since it is a financial technology firm that serves B2B customers, would it only be consisted of people and talents from AI and finance? Are there also talents and employees from other disciplines as well?
Most of our engineers have degrees in computer science, mathematics, finance, or engineering. Some of them have degrees in mathematics and business. And when it comes to the marketing and sales team, I would say that the majority were specialized in finance.
It's very interesting to see how a fintech firm like Kidbrooke would also get like a wide range of talents to join the team. But also, of course, there is a very strong focus on finance. Now, my next question would concern more about, the future of Kidbrooke. And I guess a lot of like our listeners would be very interested in seeing how Kidbrooke plans to scale your offering.
We definitely would begin from the Nordics, where we currently operate. And as I said before, we are very actively expanding to the UK right now. And we later plan to extend our reach to Netherlands and Germany. And providing the APIs itself to financial institutions is a much more scalable business model compared to the consulting setup. And I think that we also, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we focus on building partnerships and relationships with our supplier partners, trying to co-sell our solutions as a way to scale lead generation and brand recognition.
Right. And you said that you would co-sell some of your products. Who do you co-sell it with?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, in order to create a digital wealth journey, for instance, there would be many things that the customer would have to consider apart from the analytics. So it would be building the front end, it would be making sure that the cloud infrastructure is in place, making sure that in case of emergency or in case of Kidbrooke being a small company and going down, God forbid, there should be some backup because it is the financial health of thousands of people that is at stake. So we need to really ensure that we have a very nice cloud partner, and we have Microsoft. And Axians is helping us with ensuring that in case of emergency, the company we're working with will get an access to our code, and it will not stop their operations. They will be able to continue and manage the codes themselves. And yeah, we have the data providers such as Refinitiv who would supply us with necessary macroeconomic data and the sustainability data. So yeah, these are the partners that we're working with in building out the necessary journeys with the customers and also trying to sell our services together, because we really do go together. The more accesses to APIs we sell, the more cloud infrastructure Microsoft would manage to sell as well.
Yeah, it's very apparent how Kidbrooke has a lot of partners, and especially business partners that would help you guys cure your services to provide the most efficient and high quality products. Now, I'm just wondering, you mentioned before how you're also scaling up and having offices in the UK, the Netherlands, and also Germany. Why did you specifically choose those?
I believe it will come from the geographical point of view and, a point of view where the co-founders worked and where they know the markets very well. As I said, Kidbrooke was founded in London, so we have quite a good connection to the UK market in that sense. Our co-founders have lived and worked in the UK before, so that's why the UK comes after the Nordics. After the UK, we think that it would be orderly to expand to the European markets because they share quite a bit of regulatory environment to adhere to, and therefore it would make total sense from our perspective.
And I definitely understand how it's a lot more advantageous for you to go to expand to the UK because of previous connections and also an established presence in the UK. When you were talking about expanding to Europe and in other places like the Netherlands and also in Germany, was it very specific to those countries since they are in a specific region, which would help in terms of partnering up with Swedish firms? Is it a very strategic move? So what was involved in the decision process of adding them to your potential location expansions?
I think that in part it was the corporate culture that is a little bit similar to Northern Europe in general. Other than that, I think the main point would be the regulatory environment, as I mentioned before, because the EU has quite a lot of regulations that are very similar, and the directives are imposed by the same institutions to these countries and all the countries in the EU. And I think that that's why it would be Netherlands, Germany, and all the others.
Coming back to strategic transformations a bit, what would you say would be the biggest risks of such a pivoting from B2C to B2B or strategic transformation in general?
Well, we didn't pivot from B2C to B2B, so I don't know. But yeah, I think that the risk of strategic transformations usually depend on the size and the scale of such a transformation. Because if the strategy is changed just marginally, for instance, you would have a tweak in product packaging or a change in the main target audience within a certain domicile when you're expanding, the risks would be measured in the time lost, a possibility of new changes not working out, and sunk costs that would go with these efforts. These changes, though, will happen all the time. And usually the businesses have to take these risks because the world is changing, and so should the business. In regard to larger transformations, such as a substantial change in a business model like we faced, the risks are, of course, higher, but they are of the same nature. The new model may fail, and then you are at loss of time, money, and all the costs attributed to the pivot.
When would you say for a company, when they face these challenges, whether to actually pivot and do a strategic transformation or actually give up the company? So would you say there are clear signs besides being able to identify another business model where we would say just call it a day or try actually to handle such a strategic transformation?
I would say that it depends on resources at hand, whether you have the opportunity to change something or not, and whether you have a good idea how this change should look like. These resources may, of course, measure availability of the time, money, and emotional stamina, actually, to plunge into another ocean of uncertainty, and, of course, to the degree to which you believe in the alternative idea. The strategic changes usually come to agenda when there is evidence that something should be done differently.
Okay, thank you. I think the next questions will be a bit more abstractly or more generally about fintech and the fintech sphere in general. You mentioned in a guest talk and today again how the regulatory environment makes it a bit difficult for fintech to appear and to move around. Why do you think that companies like Revolut, which are really disruptive, how did they manage to penetrate the market as they did despite all these regulations?
So I guess the question would also, concern and touch upon open banking and the controversy behind it. So that would also, maybe you could mention Monzo as a good example of open banking, or fintech firms that provide personal financial services for the common people.
I'm not an expert on open banking, so I will probably not comment on that much. I think that open banking is a great initiative that would exactly have the opportunity to give the people the holistic view over their finances and change this, very traditionally siloed approach to, okay, you have your mortgage, okay, you have your investments completely separately, and then you have your, active account where you spend money on coffee. So I think that in that way, open banking is a good idea. But returning to Revolut, as you probably know, Revolut has been granted an EU banking license in Lithuania in 2018. And to my knowledge, it is still not really a UK bank. It is an FCA authorized e-money institution. But I would say that generally, it's a bit unfair to say that they are doing something that has never been done before. There are many challengers out there in the UK, even like you mentioned, Monzo, for instance, and around Europe, all providing digital financial services. But I would attribute Revolut's success and fame in particular to an attempt to solve the engagement problem that is actually so rooted in financial institutions. They try to make banking offering more fun, and they try to build the connections with their customers in a new way, in a digital way. And they were bold enough to take on all these regulatory challenges as they come. And what I wanted to stress here is that they're still facing them and they're still battling them every day. And we should appreciate that. And who knows, maybe they will receive a UK banking license quite soon.
Okay,
yeah, that's actually like super interesting, especially with government regulation that goes into fintech or just like companies in general, because if you compare it to like big companies such as Uber, it still hasn't been recognized in Hong Kong as a, legitimate app or legitimate company. I'm not sure as of right now, but last time I checked, it was like this. So it's still running. It's still very much used by the general public. And so it's kind of the way how I see it, right, is that it's very much dependent on users' recognition of it and views on a certain app or product or company in order to make it successful. I guess the second question would be in relation to fintech. According to Kidbrooke, what would be the most exciting and interesting project or company that you've worked with that really proved a great significant push to the fintech industry in general, if it's okay for you to share?
Well, I can mention our latest project that we worked on. Surprisingly, it wouldn't be a fintech company. It would be an incumbent, Scandia,
Yes.
the largest insurance company here in Sweden, one of the largest. It was founded in 1855. Imagine that. And yet they engaged with us and they keep working with us. We help them create cutting edge digital pension planning solution that is really market leading. So there is this convention that the fintech firms would be the first ones to innovate, but it is not always so. Sometimes large incumbents are open for actually navigating through all these infrastructural challenges and delivering new digital journeys to their customers.
Yeah, I just took a quick look at Scandia, and it's really interesting how on their website, if anyone's interested, you can go on Scandia and essentially you could just put in your information of what is the value you want to retire at and like the salary that you're earning, and then they will help you estimate on the spot using their cutting edge technology that I think Kidbrooke has helped them with to provide a certain amount of value that you'd have to start saving with. So I guess like this cutting edge of technology has really allowed transparency and has allowed, organized planning for everyone's personal financial journeys, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I think that one thing to add on that point as well is that there are quite a lot of offerings that offer something similar. But what we saw with Scandia is the level of detail and quality that they were aiming to give to their customers. For instance, the solution that they created in the end encompasses very, very complex calculations of how your salary would look like throughout your entire life. So it wouldn't just take something that you earn and assume that you will earn that for the next 40 years like the others do. And also it has quite complex calculations in place that would estimate the mortality rates and everything that is actually supposed to be taken into account when you are giving the regulated financial advice.
Right. That's where I see the value proposition of Kidbrooke to be, right?
Exactly.
So their value is providing these cutting edge technology that would require mathematical, calculations in their system so that they could do it for us. They could do it for the businesses and the customers. Now, more questions about fintech and your advice specifically. So what are the key elements that you think fintech startups need to make in the fintech space in order for it to thrive? And more so, what advice would you give founders with a startup in the fintech sphere?
What a good question. I believe it is crucial to be good at what you do and to have a good idea. For example, the founders at Kidbrooke have worked in the financial industry for many years. They knew it well, and they were experienced professionals in quantitative finance. And they have seen this industry lacks engagement. So we're in business of providing reliable software that can drive engagement in financial services and wealth management. Other things, I guess, would be striving to find your focus, because at some point, especially given a broad skill set, there may be a temptation to do 100 of different things at the same time. And make sure that you have a great team.
I think also, I guess what you've said before, fintech is it's human capital is extremely important, especially because that is one of the greatest assets of the company, since they will be the people that will be constantly improving and maintaining the health of the services. Now, do you think that Finn would want to guide this question as well? Do you think fintech is moving in a specific direction as of right now? And what are some trends within the fintech market that you are observing and you're like, oh, hey, I think we should definitely hop onto this trend and, expand it?
Well, I think that at first, fintech emerged as a sort of an alternative to the incumbent financial industry, the ones that have existed for many decades. However, I would say that the general trend is that there are more and more instances where the fintechs and established banks and insurers work together. So they are not a threat anymore, but more like a partner. Since Kidbrooke is B2B, it is especially the case for us. As I said, we've helped Scandia, and we are very open to help the other very much established banks and insurers to hop on the digitalization trend. And within the B2C area, we see that players engage in relationships with the existing industry as well. For instance, there is a fintech that's called Dreams, a Swedish financial planning app that would put your money into the accounts of Ålandsbanken, which is an older bank that was founded in 1919. These partnerships occur due to the synergy of these particular skills. The fintechs are good at providing engagement, while the established players have the scale and the regulatory permits to operate. So I think that now it's more partnerships than, oh my God, the threat of fintechs. But I still think that the banks and insurers that have existed a long time should be really aware that if they will not change, their market shares may drop.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're moving towards such a digitalized world where all of our currencies and, like money exchange cannot really be done without fintech, without, digital technology. So I think it's only fair and the only way forward for synergy to happen, because we definitely are, like stronger together. One of the last few questions to ask are, what are some fintech startups to watch, and in what avenues would you say we should look at these trends going? For example, like Invest Sweden, or are there specific websites that we should follow to see its growth?
Well, I think that it really depends on why would you choose to watch the certain fintechs, because whether you want to become a customer, whether you look at them from the VC perspective, or whether it's just general interest in how the technology evolves and you want to be somehow like up to speed, or you could even look at them from the perspective of a customer in a B2B environment, right? So you want to improve some function in your bank and you're looking at them from that direction. Therefore, I just advise to be very open-minded and curious and watch those who, in your opinion, can create emotional connection between the financial institutions and customers sustainably. And what I mean by that is that they need to strive to create this engagement, but at the same time caring about their trust capital. Because in some cases, these values may really contradict, but trust has to remain at the core of what this emotional connection should constitute.
Right. And how do you think is the best way to build trust between partners and to maintain that?
Well, I believe that it needs to be about the quality of the financial services that you provide in the end, because you can make bright promises and you can spend a lot of money on your user experience, but you need to make sure that the numbers are crunched correctly, that your tech is up to speed to deal with everything that comes in. And of course, you need to look at your compliance and cybersecurity, because these are becoming the key points of where the trust can be very easily lost.
That's so true. I've recently watched the Netflix documentary, The Great Hack and Social Dilemma. And honestly, I don't think there's another issue that is so close to home, that hits so close to home for every single person, because we technically have data stored and it has the possibility of being mined and extracted by companies. And one very interesting scholar and academic called Zuboff, she's a professor in Harvard, and she came out with this book called Surveillance Capitalism. And she kind of like delves into how, if data is not treated well, and if it's not treated with trust and respect, data mining and data extraction would be our next biggest human rights, violation and issue that needs to be regarded and has to be addressed, because essentially the Declaration of Human Rights has to encompass the accountability of state actors and non-state actors, which I think business entities would play into this in a very big way. So it's just very interesting to see how this all progresses. And I hope the advent of data mining would not affect people too much if it is like circumvented enough.
Yeah, for sure. That is a very important field. And I think that the investments that go into the cybersecurity and the security of personal data, especially the financial data, are very, very important.
I just have a question of, how do you create trust from your partners in the very beginning? How do you make them know that it is safe?
Well, as I mentioned, the data and the handling of the data is probably the most sensitive in the onboarding part of this customer journeys. We are not really engaged in the onboarding. But of course, we would go through the customer data when we are going to, give a certain advice. But in that part as well, we don't really store it. So there is no way we can access it. The APIs are only sifting somehow through it, but they don't store it. And they also don't really see who it is. So basically, it's anonymized data.
Right. I see. Okay. That really like clears things up for me. And since we're nearing the end of our podcast session, I'd also like to congratulate Kidbrooke and Zaliia on the 2020 version of Stockholm Fintech Guide that has been released very, very recently. And it's just a comprehensive summary of like the Stockholm's fintech community, which is available for everyone. And basically, Zaliia had the opportunity to contribute to the report with a story on how like Scandia has leveraged Kidbrooke and their technology to build an innovative digital pension planning journey for the customers. So if anyone's interested in checking that out, do give it a look. It's another really interesting report and resource to refer to if you're interested in the fintech industry, especially within the Nordic region. So once again, congratulations for that. And
Thank you.
if you have anything more to add.
That's it for me as well. Thank you so much for answering all our questions. It was really helpful and really insightful. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, nice. And
Much.
really thanks so much for making all the effort.